and we'll go ahead and set the recording to begin because that's always fun to get a nice view. I'm just going to flip through the screens just to say hello and good morning. And then I will go ahead and mute all and let Ginger get us started if that sounds okay. You see the chat window is open. Please let us know maybe what spoke to you the most this week in your readings. And that's just a fun way for us to interact. And we'll be doing off and on chats throughout the morning, I think.
There we go.
So, all right, I'm going to mute all. And then Ginger, you take care of unmuting yourself. And I'm going to set it to view in on you, if that's all right.
That's great. All right. Yes, last week, if you were on with us, I forgot to unmute myself and started praying. And Lane, who edits the video, she was threatening to send me outtakes of what that looked like. So I remembered this week. Thank you, Michelle, for reminding me. Let's open with a word of prayer this morning to get us started. Okay? Join me. Oh, dear gracious God. Thank you for the women that are gathered here this morning. Thank you for the intention they have put around connecting with you as a priority. God, we had a beautiful and troubling journey through 41 Psalms this week. We see the psalmists crying out to you in suffering, and we see hope and joy. And we each feel that in our own hearts today and every day. Help us pay attention to this. Help us feel comfortable in bringing the truth of what we feel to you. Allow us each to absorb the lessons you would have us absorb. Be with Maribeth today as she shares her beautiful story of resilience and questioning and hope. And let us all use this time to grow closer to you and feel your holy presence. In your name, amen. So I love that Michelle asked you to put in what you noticed in the Psalms or something that spoke to you or your favorites. I love that. That's exactly how I wanted to start today. So you have read 41 Psalms, which I'm sure if we had the statistics is more than most people have ever read. So you are clipping away at the biggest book of the Bible, 150 ancient poems. Last week, I showed you a timeline, and the timeline is important just to kind of orient ourselves to what we're reading when these were written. So these were written 3,000 to 2,500 years ago. That is before Jesus. These were Hebrew poems used in Jewish worship. Rabbis taught from these poems. Jesus would have grown up reading these Psalms, reading the psalmist crying out to God. So what you're reading is pre-Christian, and I think that's really important for us to remember that the Psalms give us a window into human condition and the nature of God. Through thousands of years. And when you think about how long a generation of a human is, you think about countless generations that have read these same poems. So I just love orienting ourselves in that ancient wisdom and that ancient permission to be fully human. This week, we're going to dive into what it means to lament. And so we're starting, the majority of lament is in book 1, 2, and 3. And then books 4 and 5 of the Psalms, remember they're small books within a big book. So they're like poetry collections within the big book of Psalms. Book 4 and 5 really take us to joy and hope, but we start kind of in the pit. We start in the trenches of what it means to be human. So today we're going to talk about what it means to lament to God. And then you'll have an activity kind of at the end, and then Maribeth Hinderer is going to share with you her story, and we'll do breakouts, and then we'll come back and wrap up. So that's kind of our plan for today. So I would like, if you would like to speak up, I would love for you to unmute yourself, and Michelle's going to help me facilitate this. And tell me, what did you learn about human nature and the nature of God this week in those 41 Psalms, or in however many Psalms you were able to read? What insights did you gain into these ancestors of ours and how they felt? Maybe insight into God. Would anybody like to share?
One thing I noticed was that they often thought that the bad things that happened to them or their illness was due to their behavior.
Exactly. Good. That's a great observation. Yep. They felt like they were being punished.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Good. We're going to talk about that theology today. What else did you notice?
Go ahead, Marnie.
Wanted to know whether these were written before or after his affair with Bathsheba.
Oh, okay. Good question. So it depends on which psalm we're talking about. Next week, we're going to talk about authorship. Who wrote these? So David did write a lot of them, but not all of them. So depending on which psalm you're reading, would address the issue of authorship. There are some thoughts that certain psalms were written in his remorse. In David's kind of guilt. So we will get, I'm glad you asked that. We'll talk about authorship and a little teaser. Scholars don't think David wrote as many as we used to think. We think that they associated the Psalms with David. But many of the voices were common people like you and I that would write things like songs today, write lyrics that would be used like a song in worship. And so just like we have Matt Beisel writing these beautiful songs that we're hearing in worship right now, a psalmist was like that. And so some of them are David, because we know David was a musician, but many are just common people that were writing lyrics and poetry at the time. But that's a great question. And I will look at if we know anything about Bathsheba specifically with David. It's a great question.
I was interested in how much the imperative voice was used in the Psalms. Demands almost, do this for me, act on my behalf, arise, get busy, come, go, help. It just was like, at first I was kind of affronted by it because I'd never really taken in that much of the Psalms at one time to hear that repetitive voice. And it was interesting to me how David used that, and also how poignant and relevant the same words are for us today. It was just very interesting.
Oh, Linda, I love that comment. That's right. The psalmists are asking God to take action, like do something. Great observation. Great observation. That we're going to talk about elements of lament. That is one of the elements of lament, is that you request action. So good. You picked up on that beautifully.
Got time for 2 hours.
Remember,
What else?
I don't know. Can I just speak?
Yeah.
Okay. Okay. Don't know the Zoom thing. I just loved the roller coaster ride, and it was such a testament to how up and down we are, and how we're so not assured, and how we have to be heard. And he just cries out, and then he says, "Oh, you heard me. I feel so good about that." And then the last 3 Psalms in the book really remind me of Job and his friends, and how much that just resonates with the rest of the word, in that there's always a link that is so poignant. And I just thoroughly enjoyed doing this. I think I have 40 pages of stuff. But anyway, thank you.
Oh, Anne, I love all of that. I love that you picked up on the roller coaster. And it can go one line to another, right? That's what's so fun in the Psalms, is the pivot happens really quickly. And sometimes I wonder, what was their real period of time in which they were shifting from these emotions? We see it line by line. But I love that. And that's exactly why I think the Psalms are so good for us today, is we are riding that roller coaster. I mean, we can wake up hopeful and go to bed in despair, or opposite, we can wake up in despair and end the day in hope, and ride that roller coaster throughout the day. And that is what this poetry kind of normalizes, right? It gives us permission to ride a roller coaster of emotions and not feel like we're crazy or something's wrong with us. It's part of being human. So I love that, Anne. And I'm so glad you're loving reading them all together, because when I did that that's what I loved about it too. I had never read them one after another before, and I wasn't really familiar with them. So it's so fun to do that and really dive into what it means to be human. I think the Psalms really show us that, and what it means to live in faith with God.
Yes.
Yeah.
You know, the one thing that concerned me is I don't think any of the Psalms were written by women.
You got it. We don't.
And
think that's right.
And you know that it bothers me because women had, particularly at that time, such a different experience than men did, and we don't hear their side of the story in the Psalms.
That's right. That's right. Well, you're going to write a psalm. These women are going to write a psalm this week. So we will have some psalms coming into the world written by women. But yeah, Kim, that's right. We don't know. And some scholars, some feminist theologians will say maybe they were written by women, but given a man's name because they wouldn't have been read otherwise. So there's a chance. But I think a book of Psalms written by women would be amazing. I will also say on the book list within week 1, there is a version I listed called the Inclusive Psalms. And that is written by a group of priests and women consultants with them that took out all of the patriarchy language, the male language, the father language, and just kept it kind of gender neutral. And those read differently. So you might be interested in that, Kim, the Inclusive Psalms.
But the original Psalms were still written by men. It doesn't change that.
That's right. It doesn't. It doesn't. It just opens our eyes to see that a little bit sometimes if we read different translations. But yeah, women just didn't have a voice. That's fact. Women did not have a voice.
When you read the book of Esther, I wish that it had been written from her point of view. It's just so, I just read, John Ortberg did a thing on her in one of his chapters from It All Goes Back in the Box. And it's written from such a testosterone point of view and to appeal to men that I was taken back by it. And I didn't really agree with what he was talking about. And that's becoming more and more evident the more that I read the word. And so I'm glad to hear that there are some inclusive comments being made. Thank you.
There are, but I would also say for 87 of us listening to this right now, write.
Yes.
Start writing.
Right.
My dream would be that you all write something and that, 1,000 years from now, they're reading the words of Anne, right?
Okay.
Okay, get on that, Anne.
Okay.
I see a hand, Marnie.
Yeah, I have a soft voice, so I can barely get in, but I liked his connection with nature a lot.
Good.
He talked about nature and also his perceiving the world with lots of enemies instead of friends. And I thought that was...
My question is, who is the enemy?
It's
Yeah.
right. It's different for each of us, right? I want you to think about that as you, at the end of the class, we're going to talk about writing your own lament. I start thinking about who is the enemy. It's different. I think the enemy is different within the Psalms too. Sometimes it's somebody persecuting them or oppressing them. Oftentimes it's an oppressor. Sometimes it's somebody who they knew that personally harmed them. We all have those people that we would label maybe an enemy. And we know Jesus says, forgive your enemies, love your enemies, right? But it's also okay to talk to God about your enemies. And that's what I think the psalmists give us permission to kind of process. This is what I'm feeling. I don't like what I'm feeling about this person, but I'm feeling it and I'm hurt. And you will also see language of revenge. The psalmist asking God to take revenge, punish the enemies. And this goes to kind of the theme of all of us wrestling with, why do good things happen to bad people and bad things happen to good people? That is a question that I think we all have as a human being. And 3,000 years ago, they were asking these same questions. So yeah, that nature, or that human nature that wants good things to happen to good people and bad things to happen to bad people, that's deep within us.
Could an enemy not be a person, but like a disease or a fear or something like that?
Yes, absolutely. In fact, there are a few that I will flag in the notes that are really pertinent to chronic illness, to disease. And they read like, I'm fighting this disease, I'm fighting this illness. And I used to have them at the tip of my tongue. I'll have to get those for you, but there's a couple that really speak to illness. There's one that really speaks to suicide. So I'll make a list of those because yes, you picked up on it. You guys are so awesome. So insightful. That's exactly right. The enemy could be lots of different things for each one of us. It can also be systems. There's, corruption being called out, empire, system kind of enemy. I love this conversation. Okay, I'm going to ask Michelle to put up a poll now that asks where you... Did I cut somebody off? Okay, Michelle, will you put up the poll about feeling close to God? And I'll give you a few seconds to answer this. When have you felt closest to God? In times of pain, fear, or suffering, or in times of joy and celebration? Just answer, don't overthink it. Just really think about when have I felt, or when have I called on God or felt closest to God? And while we're doing that, I'm going to kind of define lament for us. So lament, you'll hear that word a lot, and you hear that word in kind of Bible studies throughout the Bible. You might come upon that word. It generally means complaining in faith to God. So different than just complaining to your girlfriend about how hard life is right now. Lament is a conversation with God about your suffering. And underneath a lament is a faith that God exists, God can hear me, and God can do something about it. So that's the faith component. So you're complaining about your suffering with this sense of faith that you're talking to God. God exists and can do something to help you. There's some power there and cares about you. So that's the piece of faith that we see in lament. You may have picked up or been told by a pastor that faith and complaining don't go together. If you're complaining and upset with God, then you're not being faithful, or you're not faithful enough. And I call a big red flag on that theology because what I have found in my study throughout seminary and continuing to study this and meet with so many faithful people one-on-one is I am convinced you can complain and be disappointed in God and still be a very faithful person. And I want you to think about your relationships with other human beings. If you quit talking to a human being, you're giving up on them, right? But if you're still in conversation saying, hey, this thing happened and we need to talk about this and work through it, then you still are in a relationship with that person. It's worth working through the hard stuff with them. You're in it. So think about that with God. If you quit talking to God about the hard stuff, then, I'm guessing God feels like you've checked out. But if you're willing to connect with God and work through the hard stuff, then that's faith. So you can be disappointed and faithful at the same time. Let's think about too, what is, let's see, Michelle, do you have the poll results?
There you go.
Okay, awesome. So 65% felt closest to God in times of pain, fear, or suffering, and 35% in times of joy or celebration. I love that. Well, you guys are so good because that's about the percentage that the Psalms break down into in my handy dandy visual aid. So I would screen share with a very polished slide for you, but it's a little cumbersome when we do that. So I colored this morning and worked out this was cathartic. So 40% of the Psalms are laments. 40% of the 150 are lament. And then we have 28% praise. So that's about roughly how we broke down in this class. I only asked you those two options, but that's about how we broke down in our own experience. And then thanks and trust is this purple color. It's 18%. And the green is other, which would be like royal psalms. You'll find at the end, there's a lot of psalms about like coronations and ordinations and kind of royal psalms with lots of empire language in them. That makes up this green part. They were used in ceremonies. But what I want to focus on today is that almost half are laments. And that is more than half of us have felt closest to God in times of pain. So that's a good thing. And I want to honor that the times when you have felt closest to God are because you were relying on God in suffering and pain and fear. And that's a beautiful sense of faith, right? That's really what faith is all about. So if you have been taught that worry and complaint are mutually exclusive with faith, then I want you to just kind of free yourself of that obligation, because you have been in it, in the pit with God, and everything I have studied says that's God wants us to call on him from the pit. So what do we know about the human condition? We want a world that's predictable. We want explanations for why things happen. We want explanations so that we can avoid the bad stuff, right? Because we think we're in control. So if somebody gets COVID right now, what's the first question? How did you get it, right? Where did you pick it up? That's because we're hoping we can avoid that. Whatever they did wrong, we're not going to do. That's kind of an embedded judgment that we are carrying around. And it's just important to know that we have that. So it's not that you're a bad person, it's that your brain is wired to survive. And so of course your first question is, how do I survive? How do I stay safe? But that shows up in the Psalms a lot because our human condition is to never want to suffer. And so that's why they're complaining about suffering. Our deepest security or deepest longing is security and safety. And so the psalmists are crying out in fear and despair because there's a disconnect. They want nothing more than to feel secure, and they want God to reassure them that everything's going to be okay. And when that doesn't happen, we start to think we're being punished. And what did we do wrong? And as Linda said, that imperative voice is really strong because we want out of the suffering as fast as possible. We want rewards for being good and doing the right thing. And we want people who aren't doing the right thing to be punished, right? That's part of our human condition. We need it to work that way, to have peace, especially all of you on this call, because you're working at being faithful people. You're studying and working at it. So you want that more than anything of, I want to get it right. And I want indication that I've gotten it right. And sometimes suffering makes us question, did I get it wrong? And that's part of our human condition. So what else do we know to be true? We know that the reality we live in is that bad things will happen to every single one of us. We will face devastation multiple times in our life. That's a given. And if we know that, then we're less rocked when it happens, right? This is just one of those moments of devastation that I'm going to endure in my life. It doesn't mean that God is punishing you. So we know that accidents happen, breakups, storms, diseases, we will age, we will lose a job, we will love somebody that has an addiction, we will lose money, we will make bad decisions, we could be a victim of crime, or somebody we love maybe, there will be war, there will be death, there will be pandemics. That's the reality that we live in. So when we have a theology that says, if I do all the right things, nothing bad will happen to me, that doesn't hold up. And it just sets you up to be further devastated and possibly give up on God when that happens, because we know bad things are going to happen. So part of me being so passionate about teaching the Psalms is that I think a lot of us grew up with preachers that weren't having these conversations. And so then we're devastated when the bad things happen because we really bought in to the idea that if I do things right and do the right things, I'll be rewarded. And there's scripture to prove that, right? There, be righteous and the 10 commandments and all of that is very biblical. The problem is that we start to form an embedded belief that says if people are blessed, you know, hashtag blessed, right? If people are blessed, then God is proud of them or rewarding them. And somehow when the wheels are falling off my life, God must not care about me. Okay, that's a really important thing to uncover if you have that embedded belief. Part of our devastation when things go badly is because we haven't wrestled with this question enough. So think about how we buy into the idea that something good will happen, right? We buy skin cream hoping that wrinkles will go away. We exercise so that we feel better and see results. We avoid certain foods because they might give us cancer. We do things, we are humans living in a society that pushes this idea of do something and get rewarded for it. Work hard, make more money. Work hard, become the CEO. We very much have this deeply programmed. So just understand that what the psalmists are feeling thousands of years ago, we're still feeling because it's human nature with deeply embedded beliefs. And I would argue society, you know, is on such a fast pace of evolution right now that like technology is evolving faster than our brains are. So we're probably inundated with these messages way more than the humans 1,000 years ago. So consider that we may be struggling even more. So that was my soapbox for saying, begin to get comfortable with the idea that bad things will happen to us, and it is not a punishment from God. And I think that's why the Psalms are so important, because they were part of the canon, right? In 325, so almost 300 years after Jesus had died and been resurrected, the Bible became the Bible. 300 years. So the stories were being refined and translated and retold and told differently over 300 years. And then in 325, a bunch of men sat in a room and put their stamp on what would be the Bible that we would have today. And slowly we're chipping away at breaking through some of that patriarchy. But they included the Psalms in that, which I think is a pretty cool statement of there was an intentional decision to keep all of this screaming, violent, crying out to God literature in the Bible. And I think it's a message of bad things will happen, but God is with you through it. And that's what we see in the Psalms. So I want to go now to this idea of liminal space. You may hear this word. I'm seeing it more and more in people's writings, using the term liminal space. I didn't know about this word until I was in seminary. But the idea of liminal space is that it's the space in between. So we've lost something and we haven't gained something new yet. And we're just living in the loss. We're living in this space of, you'll hear the term, it's your new normal, right? So that's kind of liminal space. Like, I liked life like it was, and it just got devastated. And I don't know what life is going to be like in the future. That's liminal space. And the Psalms really live in liminal space. You hear a lot of the psalmists crying out of, I've lost everything. I'm devastated. My faith is rocked. My possessions have all been taken by my enemies, and I don't know how to go on. That's liminal space. We see this with Jesus. The liminal space is the 3 days. It's symbolic of liminal space. So the disciples had this teacher that they so believed in and trusted, and questioned at times as well, but watched a gruesome, horrible death and watched God not intervene in that. And so it really rocked their world. And the 3 days is the liminal space. The 3 days is what are we going to do now? How can we go on? I can't live like this without Jesus. And then we see the resurrection and we see the new thing come. And I'm speaking to you in 2020 on liminal space because we're really living in liminal space with this pandemic and many other things that we're just in a holding pattern on. But the pandemic really, in March for North America, life as we knew it ended suddenly. Our freedoms were taken away. Everything was canceled. It was a major, major upset into life as a human being in North America. And it continues. We don't know how this is going to play out. We are in liminal space right now. So we don't know if office buildings will ever be full again, or if people will live in bustling cities and crowded sidewalks without masks on. Will sports stadiums be body to body ever again? Will kids get to be kids and not go to school in a mask, or go to school online? We are in liminal space asking all these questions. And so I wanted to highlight that for you early in our study so that as you're reading the Psalms, you understand, oh, this psalmist knows what it feels like to live in liminal space. I too am living in liminal space. We see this with a diagnosis. You know, you get a medical diagnosis and maybe there's a treatment plan, maybe there's not, but you're facing a completely new normal. The sickness going through treatment, the debilitation, the recovery, that's all liminal space. And a very simple definition of this, yes, I see Kathy's comment that just popped up of living in limbo. That's right, we are very much in limbo right now, and the psalmists were too. Anytime you have devastation in your life, you go into a sense of limbo. I think about this in a positive sense with a high school senior who graduates from high school, and they'll go to college in August, but there's the summer in between, right? And if you've raised a graduate, you've lived in this liminal space with them. They have this huge celebration, they're ending something, they're headed to something grand, but in July, they're still living at home. And so it felt like everything was going to change, but I'm kind of in limbo. The new hasn't started yet. That's a very positive kind of liminal space, right? It's exciting, but I'm also a little bit stuck because the new thing hasn't started. So you'll see some of that in the Psalms too. Like, I'm hopeful, I know this good thing is coming, but I haven't seen it yet. And all of this is to help us better understand ourselves as human beings and what we feel. So Walter Brueggemann uses this word that many of you I know have heard of, or this 3 words, this process of moving from orientation through disorientation through reorientation. And Richard Rohr has simplified it into order, disorder, reorder. And the idea of these theologians, and I will say Brueggemann based it on the Psalms. He was teaching on the Psalms when he used this terminology the first time. And so we come from a place of everything's in order, right? Things are going well. That's Brueggemann's orientation. We're living life, it's oriented, we're good. Then something happens and we become disoriented, and disorder reigns in our life. This is the liminal space. This is the limbo. This is I can't make sense of what's happening. My faith just got rocked because I thought if I was a good person, bad things wouldn't happen to me. All of that is disorienting, disorder. But we know as human beings and hopeful, faithful human beings that it will return to order. We will go through a period of reordering, reorientation, and someday we will have peace again. That's the hope, the faith, the trust piece. But what's important is to recognize, to get to reorder, to get to the good, many times we have to go through the bad. And so if we just kind of know that and expect that, then it's not so devastating as we are going through it. And the laments, most of them sit in a place of disorder. The psalmist is writing from a place of disorder. So as Marnie was pointing out, this idea of, was David guilty for his affair with Bathsheba at the time? Possibly, because he kind of wrecked his life with that decision, right? And so he was in a phase of disorder, like things are crashing. There are consequences to what I've just done. I've made some really bad decisions with all of it. That story has layers, but he's trying to reorder his faith, but he's got to sit in the consequences a little bit. So maybe he was writing about that. The sitting in the consequences, the sitting in the pit, the sitting in the despair, the sitting in the reality of the diagnosis, all of that is liminal space, and all of that is disorder and disorientation. So I give you that little dose of teaching just to help you understand that this is part of being human. It's not that you've done anything wrong. We should expect this kind of cycle in our lives over and over again. And as painful as it is, my hope is that it draws all of us closer to God as we go through the disorientation and the reorientation. And that's what Brueggemann and Rohr both teach, is go to God in your disorientation and your disorder, and then your faith deepens on the other side. So the last thing I want to offer you today is kind of an insight into the structure of lament. So scholars that love to spend time on this have boiled laments down into some components. There are some predictable things that we find in laments. And I just want you to be aware of that as you continue to read, because you have 2 more books coming up in the Psalms that have a lot of laments. Even some of them, you'll think you've made the turn into praise and joy, and then there's a super violent one that rocks your world. So we still have some of this coming. But the elements of lament are that you will see a complaint, a crying out to God. The psalmist will ask questions of God. They will make requests. That's what Linda was noticing with the imperative language, like, do this. They may bargain with God, and they will express anger at God. Those are all kind of the emotions within lament. The scholars describe this as an address. So, God, I'm talking to you, right? They're getting God's attention usually in the first couple lines. And you'll see phrases like my Lord, or oh God, or my Redeemer, or my Savior, my fighter God. You'll see different words like titles of how the psalmist feels about their relationship with God. Then you'll see the complaint, and the complaint is the problem that the psalmist is having. This is why I'm crying out to you, God. I'm suffering here. And this is where we get the language of, are you punishing me? Why are you so far away? Where are you when I need you? You have abandoned me. I served you well, and now you're gone. How long are you going to let me suffer? How long are you going to let this pandemic go on? Why are you rejecting me? What did I do wrong? I thought you said if I was righteous, I would be rewarded. But I see my enemies being rewarded. The bad guys are winning and the good guys are losing. That's all within the complaint element. Then there's a request, which is, God, do something. Here's what I need you to do, God. And some are more specific than others. But there's definitely an action element. And I think that's important to understand with lament is that's that faithful piece. I'm asking God to do something because I'm faithful that God can do something. So lament doesn't just complain, it seeks change. It says, let's fix it. And the psalmist we're going to talk about next week even says, I'll work on it too. It's not just you, God. Let's do this together. That's agency. That's sharing agency. But we got to fix this. This cannot go on. And faith is, God, I think you're capable of fixing it, and I'm asking you to fix it. So that's why the requests get very imperative language sometimes is, that's faith. I know you can do this. The motivation is the part that always interests me, because I think we see ourselves in this, almost like painfully see ourselves. If you've ever made a bargain with God, like, God, get me through this and then I'll never do it again, or God, save me and I'll be good from here on out, or God, I messed up, but if you help me figure out a way out, I promise I'll never do this again. We also see bargaining like, if you save me, I'll tell everybody about you and the miracle you performed for me. This will bring you glory, God, if you save me right now. we see a lot of that. And that was really intriguing to me at first when I started studying the Psalms, because I was like, oh yeah, we do that, don't we? So I hope you'll look into yourself a little bit and be like, ooh, I remember making a deal with God. But what I want you to do is not think you're a bad person. Think that that's part of being human. Of course you did it. The psalmist did it too. We're trying to motivate God. We think that we can talk God into something. And that's part of our human nature, which is, it's almost like cute when you read it, because we all do it, right? So just accept that about yourself. We're going to try to motivate God to help us. But that's an element to watch for in the Psalms. And then there's this piece of confidence, of faith. That's the pivot you see, as Anne described the roller coaster, right? Like I'm down, but now I'm up. Those pivots are confidence. It's like the psalmist gets reminded, oh yeah, you did this for me before. Oh yeah, you can get me out of this because I saw what you did in Israel. Or you saved other people, so I'm sure you can save me. That's the confidence statements. And you'll see a lot of those. Those are the pivots into praise, joy, almost like manifesting it. Like, God, I am going to be so happy when you save me from this despair. It's like they're putting it into the universe that it's going to happen. That's confidence. So I want you to kind of watch for those things. But what I really hope you're getting out of this class is realizing the permission to be human that the Psalms give us. And as I said last week, a lot of the Psalms have been sanitized that we hear in worship. Maybe a line has turned into a beautiful song. And, maybe we just read the beautiful ones about nature. As a deer at the water, I thirst for you. And the Lord is my shepherd. And we love those versions of the Psalms. But what I also want you to know is that when we skip over the messy stuff, when we don't teach how to lament or point out these Psalms, we're reinforcing that theology that good things happen to good people. And what I think is important as you're talking with your family, with your friends, is have these conversations about the Psalms, that this is part of being human, and stuff happens when we're human, and it's okay to cry out to God. You're not being punished. You're not less faithful. God is there to get you through it and walk with you through it. Ann Williams does a service at Resurrection Downtown called the Longest Night Service in December, and I love helping her with that service, because what Anne focuses on is a night of lament. And she does it on the winter solstice, which is technically if the schedule works right, we try to do it on the winter solstice, which is technically the darkest, the shortest light day, right? The darkest day, so the longest night. And when we were first talking about it, she sent me this quote from Barbara Brown Taylor in the book Learning to Walk in the Dark, which I love that book. I know we've talked about it in classes before. It's really a good book. But here's the quote that inspired the Longest Night Service. New life starts in the dark. Whether it is a seed in the ground, a baby in the womb, or Jesus in the tomb, it starts in the dark. There is a light that shines in the darkness, which is only visible there. So you only see the light if you're in the dark, right? And that's really applicable to lament. And that's why that service is so important to Anne and I. It's a service where we just have candles lit and we anoint and we cry, and the music is from the Psalms, from lament, and we just sit in that life is hard, the hard stuff of life. And I hope more churches will do this kind of work. There are various reasons we don't do it. It's hard for pastors to manage heaviness, and they're already dealing with so much heaviness. But what I think is important, if you are, I know we represent a lot of churches in this class. If you can take that influence back and hold space for lament, you're giving a gift to faithful people that it's okay to feel like you're in the dark. I'll also say, as somebody pointed out earlier, the book of Job is full of lament. So is Jeremiah, Habakkuk, Lamentations. Do you see the title of that book? Lamentation has the word lament in it. That's Jeremiah's crying out to God. And Ecclesiastes has a ton of, God, you've betrayed me, you've hurt me, none of this matters, life is stupid. You know, that's basically the book of Ecclesiastes is, God, are you even real? So this isn't just in the Psalms. So if you're having conversations with other people of faith, there's quite a bit of lament, but we tend to skip over it in just because it's hard stuff. It's hard stuff, but with your suffering, it's a lifeline. So I want to end on this. A couple of key points here are that lament happens with faith, not in a lack of faith. That there's a paradox here of we think being angry with God might hurt our relationship with God, but being angry with God and expressing it to God is actually moving you closer to God. Feeling like you can't be honest and tell the truth with God will cause you to put distance between yourself and God. So having permission to lament and cry out is actually bringing you closer to a deeper relationship with God. And God can handle our truth, right? Why do we think that God can't handle this? God, one, already knows how we feel and wants us to process it. If I pick up my kids from school and I can tell they've had a bad day, but they say, it's fine, I'm fine, it's fine. That hurts me because they don't trust me enough to tell me what really happened. But if they get in the car and they're crying and Mom, this person was mean and mad at me and I don't know what I did, and I love that because then I can hold space and listen to them. And I know they trust me to be vulnerable and feel safe with me. So sometimes I think parenting helps us understand our relationship with God. God wants us to share it all. God wants us in that conversation and in that relationship. So who are we to think that God wouldn't want to hear that stuff, right? And I want you to remember that as Christians, this is our fundamental story, that there was a crucifixion, a gruesome, horrible goodbye, and then there was liminal space, and then there was a resurrection. A new, beautiful thing was created. So this is our founding story as Christians. So when you are in that, that's where your hope comes from, right? When you are in the pit, when you are in the awful, horrible story in the liminal space, the hope is that God will redeem it and do something beautiful with it. My grandfather, who was a cattle rancher, used to say, we wouldn't appreciate the spring if it weren't for the winter. And that, you know, I would hear that as a child and think, oh yeah, I appreciate the flowers blooming, but oh my goodness, what a metaphor for life that is. And I think about him so often with that wisdom. And when I'm in the winter, when I'm in the suffering, in the darkness, I hold on to that there will be spring. In some form, things will bloom again. And that's the foundation of a Christian faith. That's really what it means to be Christian. So you are going to write a lament this week, and I am going to have a worksheet posted under week 2 for you to write your own lament. And I hope you'll embrace this and try it. It's very cathartic and helpful. And I will give you a structure. Oh, Cindy, I love that. Winters can be beautiful. They sure can. That's an awesome statement. In the handout, you're going to see that loose structure for the Psalms and some instructions on maybe what to think about kind of in each element. It's really just a prompt to help you get started. I hope you just let your soul spill out on the page. But use language like the psalmists do, which is, I'm languishing here. Heal me, for my bones are shaking in terror. I'm weary with mourning. Every night I flood my bed with tears, right? You have all kinds of phrases in those first 41 Psalms that you can borrow. Remember, these were performance art. This was performance art and poetry to make a point and to cry out in dramatic fashion. So let yourself do that. Give yourself permission to do that. Imagery is really strong in the Psalms. We mentioned the nature imagery a lot. There's also imagery for evil, like a lion crouching in the grass, ready to pounce on me, right? Use some of that. Let your creative juices flow and come up with some of that of your own. There are enemies mentioned. Who are your oppressors, your persecutors, the people who hurt you, the people that do evil that you see? What systems are you angry with and fighting against? You can bargain with God like the psalmist says, in my death, there is no remembrance of you. That's a threat. God, if you let me die, I can't talk about you, right? That's one of those motivation pieces that kind of crack me up. There's another one, in Sheol, who could give you praise? So that's like after death is Sheol. In my death, who can praise you, right? If you don't have my voice praising you, that you should be motivated to fix my problem because of that. And then karma is very present in the Psalms. Karma shows up a lot. Like, God, come on, come through with karma. Bad people should have bad things happen. Good people should have good things happen. And the pivot is important to make on your own, which is pivot into gratitude. And if you can't make a pivot into hope right now, at least pivot into something you're grateful for. Somewhere you see God. I see you in nature, God. You know, make a pivot into hope in some form at the end. There is one psalm, you read it in week 3. There's one psalm, I think it's 88, that never makes the pivot, but only one out of 150 don't make a pivot into hope and gratitude. And I love that it's in there, because sometimes we can't make a pivot. So maybe that's permission to, one time out of 150, it's okay to not be grateful. But use those elements, have fun with the psalm or the lament exercise. Let the Psalms inspire you, be your own artist. And I'm gonna turn it over now to an amazing woman of faith and resilience. My friend, Maribeth Hinder, and I know she's a friend to many of you, is here in the office with me to speak to you today. So I'm gonna give her my seat, but I wanna introduce Maribeth. Many of you know her as the MC of the Women's Conference. She does a phenomenal job every February at Church of the Resurrection, MCing and facilitating panel discussions and adding humor in. She's a hilarious woman. You all know that. She comes from an acting and theater background. She's currently a Pilates instructor and always on the go. I've been in Maribeth's classes. Maribeth has been in my classes. We are huge fans of each other. She's a brilliant teacher. She's also my co-host on the What Matters podcast, and we have so much fun. We did a year on fear, on the topic of fear, and every one of those, I learned something from Maribeth in every episode. Those are still available on the core website under, if you search for What Matters podcast. Maribeth is my dear friend. She gives the best hugs. So when we can all hug again, you have to get a hug from Maribeth. And I am going to move so she can have this spot. And I'm going to move my art project.
Oh, I love your art project, though. I kind of have an art project, too. I already showed it to Ginger. For those of you that don't know me, I'm a lot taller than she is. And then my hair adds another 5 or 6 inches. I'm in need of a haircut. For those of you who don't know me, but feel as though perhaps you've seen me before, a couple of years ago, I realized when I started wearing my hair like this a lot, and I got my cat eye glasses, that this image popped to my mind. And those of you who have ever seen the movie Monsters, Inc., which is an animated film with Billy Crystal and John Goodman, the receptionist at Monsters, Inc. immediately popped to my mind. I mean, do I not have a doppelganger? Seriously. I went and I did research to find this picture of this woman, because I'm like, that is me. So when I look at this picture, I mean, this is so incredibly awkward. It's like talking into a mirror. But this is who I see. This is my doppelganger. So if you feel as though you've seen me before and you've seen this movie, that's why. All right, I just had to break the tension a little bit. Talking about yourself is kind of uncomfortable. I'm a 3 on the Enneagram, which strangely enough is a performer, which I have been my entire life. So weirdly, it's so much easier for me to talk to big groups of people, and which for some people, that's like deathly fearful for them, and to play a part, because I don't have to be me. I'm memorizing lines and being somebody else. Just kind of sitting down and telling stories about yourself is a little awkward. But I'm going to jump right in because Ginger asked me to speak about kind of my life and my background and how kind of we've gotten to where we are now. Growing up, I moved a lot. Up to this point in my life, I've moved about 17 times. In 4th grade, I lived in 5 houses and went to 5 different schools. So I was around 9 or 10 years old. I'm a 2-time cancer survivor. I've had more than a dozen surgeries, all but 2 of which have happened since I was 40. And I'm not going to tell you how old I am, but several decades older than 40. Good health has never been my calling card. My first son was stillborn at full term, and I was hospitalized and put on bed rest for my second child and watched extremely closely for my third. So blessedly, I have 2 amazing children. Now, I'm not trying to tell you this to elicit any sort of sympathy, but when someone wants to hear your story, these parts of my story occupy such a great space that I have to include them. And they often sort of run my viewpoint, but they also have been what has created this person and this person who sits in front of you right now. So, and I just have to touch on that liminal space one more time that Ginger talked about, because she knows we've had hours of conversations. Richard Rohr's one of my girlfriends calls him her spiritual crush. And he spends a lot of time talking about liminal space. And that was a hugely new concept for me, something that I had never been taught, because I'm a pretty fast talker. I'm a fast mover. I get a lot of stuff done. I've always had high energy. But when you're stuck in liminal space, he calls it like a threshold of a door. You can't go back, because that piece, like we were talking about with the pandemic, pre-pandemic is behind us, right? We don't know what is in front of us, but pre-pandemic is behind us, so you can't go back. You're stuck in a doorway, basically like the threshold of a door, and circumstances are not yet allowing you to move forward. That is an incredibly uncomfortable space, really, for all humans, because as Ginger was talking about, we want answers, and really we want succinct answers. We don't want a whole lot of jabber. We just want a succinct answer. We want to know what's coming. And I think that's why this pandemic is so hard for so many people. And I find myself saying all the time, I have no idea what it's going to look like on the other end. No idea. And how awkward and strange is that for all of us? So every time you go into a space where all of a sudden you are stuck in the threshold of the door and you can't go back, and life is not yet presenting circumstances to let you go forward, we are fighting. Now, some people, I know there's going to be some people out there going, I love that spot. That's my most comfortable spot. For me, no. I want to do something. I want to go forward. I want to go backwards. But I just want to say what I've learned at this point in my life, and people hate it when I say this, but that's where all the good stuff is. That's where all the good stuff is. When she talks about Brueggemann and talking about, I think that was what the story was about, being in the dark, and that there's that little piece of light. That little piece of light is what the good stuff is. Now, we can't always see that. Oftentimes you're going to see that when you look back. Lamenting for me, when she and I did our podcast together, one of the podcasts was Fear of Despair. And I went back to listen to it, which is not terribly comfortable. I mean, we kind of giggled about it when we first opened. It's like, yippee, we're going to do a podcast on despair. It was just really interesting to listen to it. And I have learned something now sitting here with Ginger talking about lamenting. And I kind of grouped lamenting originally in with despair, which to me has much more of a desperation about it than sadness or grief or sorrow. Now, you may be lamenting or in despair in those things, but all of us at this point in our lives have experienced a lot of sadness, a lot of grief. And lamenting for me, I'm really going to wrap it around when I lost my son, became kind of a full body experience. There was a desperation to it. There was a passion to the way I felt. What I had said, and I had forgotten actually, I'd said it, what I'd said in the podcast was, you dropped from your ego, stripped away, into your heart, and past that into your very center, where it's just you and God. So that concept of dark night of the soul or being in a dark cave, I was all the way down. And when you're in a dark cave, you can't see very much. But if there's a speck of light, that's really the only thing you can see. And there's a certain tunnel vision to it. And that's how I felt when I was in despair. I had a certain tunnel vision. Everything that was going on over here and around me was still happening, but I was completely unaware of it. And Ginger reminded me that I had said something about feeling nothing. So when I first spent a day realizing and coming to the realization that I hadn't felt any movement from my baby, and I was at 39 weeks, I was basically waiting to deliver. I remember this before I went to the doctor. I remember getting up out of bed, coming downstairs. We were living in Boston at the time, and literally screaming. I remember being bent over on the kitchen counter. I mean, this was 35 years ago, and I can remember it like it was yesterday. Bending over the counter, screaming at God. How could you do this to me? How could you do this to my baby? How could you do this to my husband? How could you do this? What did I do? So I was so young. I was 27, 28. Like I look at that now, that's like an infant in a womb virtually. I was so young, and I really did grow up believing the way Ginger has talked about, of, you know, kind of holding on tight. I'm a good Christian girl. I was not a bad girl in college. I was a good student. I married a great guy. We're following all the rules. That good stuff then is supposed to happen to you because you followed all the rules. Well, as we all grow up, we realize that following all the rules doesn't guarantee that you're going to have a smooth road. But at that moment, I felt I was being punished. I did something. Clearly, I did something to kill this child, or I was being punished for a lifetime of egocentricity. That was where I was. So I went a fair amount of time. I mean, we were active at a beautiful little church there in outside of Boston, and I stopped going to church. I couldn't go. There were a lot of babies in my church, and I couldn't see them. But what I did realize is that how much we humans want to run from pain. It's kind of like wanting to run from that liminal space. You know, instinctually, we go to put our hand on a hot surface, we pull our hand away. Well, as far as what I could tell, the fire was happening to me, and there was literally no pulling my hand away from it. It was just there. I had to stand there, and I had to face this, the worst pain of my life, and I couldn't pray. After that first crying out to God, I was so angry and so broken that I just was in sort of a state of nothingness for a long time. And then I remember about 8 months later, getting up and putting all the cards away. Everything had been on my dresser, putting all the cards away, and all of a sudden feeling like that hope had returned. And not very far after that, I was able to become pregnant with my son, who is now my oldest. But the opportunity to read through these all together, you know, I've taught Bible study off and on for years, and so we've all done bits and pieces of the Psalms, but I know some of you had some really important comments about what you thought about the trajectories and such of it, but to read it all together, for me, it was just a little bit painful and enlightening as well, because it created a picture of something very different than when I think of the Psalms. I know there's some of the anger, but I also think of the beauty and the poetry. So it's important to be able to drop back into those darker places of lament and realize that there actually is a trajectory of it. So again, I felt a passion in the beginning of so many of the Psalms. The psalmist, whether it was David or whoever wrote it, would begin with the words, "Oh Lord." I already hear that as sort of a, I don't want to say desperation, but a, "Oh Lord." There's a certain passion to just saying, "Oh Lord," that I feel is different from just "Dear Lord" or "Father God," or which starts a conversation, but "Oh Lord," you know, they're begging to be heard. Do you hear me? I'm right here. And the psalmists use words, and Ginger, it's so funny, we teach very similarly, because so much of what I wrote, she already told you. But, you know, give ear to my words, save and deliver me. And 10, why, O Lord, do you stand far off? 13, how long, O Lord, will you forget me? And in 22, my God, why have you forsaken me? I mean, we've all heard that one before. So not only were the psalmists crying out in despair, but Jesus himself cried out to his Father from the cross, my God, why have you forsaken me? So there was lamenting, and there was anguish, and there was despair, even in Jesus Christ. So I figure if Jesus Christ can express lament and can express despair, and how interesting that he chose word for word from Psalm 22. Again, obviously he had studied these, and that was the one he grabbed, because that was the one that touched him to his very soul. So, you know, why I feel badly, or how I have felt badly or faithless over the years, crying out, when clearly those assembling the Bible, those men assembling the Bible, that was very interesting discussion, but however true, those men who chose what was going to go in our Bible felt that the Psalms of Lament and Lamentations and Jeremiah and Job and all of those were important enough to include. You know, if we want to run away from pain and anger, let's just put all the happy stuff in there. The gospel of prosperity. Let's just talking about how people are prospering. No, they felt that it was important enough to help us understand the whole trajectory of the human condition. And then Christ felt it was important enough. He was desperate enough to cry out in pain and anguish to his Father. So I think to myself, I mean, I told Ginger when we first got together to talk about this, I spent decades feeling guilty about if I was angry at God, if I was, you know, just emotionally upset or worried, clearly I didn't have enough faith. Clearly I didn't. Well, what's come to me is that God created me exactly, me, Maribeth Hinderer, exactly as he wanted me to be. Now, maybe I've added a few things like a hairdo along the way, but he created this person exactly as he wanted me to be. And that includes all of the emotions. I mean, he could have made every one of us to be just a very happy, joyful robot, right? A Stepford wife, where we never complain about anything. We look beautiful all the time. But we were created with this full range of emotions, because if you can't ever have the passion to really be angry, it's hard to really have passion to be joyful. I mean, you can sort of stay on that midline, and that's okay too. It's all about personality types. But that extreme anger, that extreme pain, and the extreme joy is all about emotions and passions. And God made us this way. We were created this way. Each one of us is created. That's what's, I want to say again, that's where all the good stuff is. The good stuff is in all of that personality and that anger. You know, I grew up in a family that was loud and animated and very emotional, and obviously with much upheaval, with so many moves. But there was also great laughter and great joy, along with a lot of anger. And as I grew up, I realized as I was growing, I was the youngest of three by quite a bit. And I think I was probably the loudest and the most emotional of all of them. And as I got older, I realized that I wasn't really allowed to express those emotions, but my parents were. So they continued to sort of suppress that ability to be angry or to be sad, and probably because it made them uncomfortable. Or I would be angry at them and they didn't want to hear it. So they continued to sort of suppress it. And as I became an adult, I mean, again, I'm a 3 on the Enneagram, and that's one book I read said threes are the least in touch with their emotions of any of the 9 Enneagram pieces. That's kind of a sad state of affairs. But what I did all those years was I just wanted to be happy, and I wanted everyone around me to be happy, and I wanted to be funny, and I wanted to be strong. And so you kind of create this person that you really want to be. And so as these different occurrences would happen to me over my lifetime, I would sort of go into sort of a stoic mood and then into a, okay, whatever, you know, this is just another piece of life kind of a mood. And I want to hope that as I've gotten older, I'm starting to realize that it is okay, that I can be sad and not think less of myself and not worry that other people aren't then going to look at me as being the strong one, or that I can get angry, or that I can every now and again feel a little tiny bit sorry for myself for some of the things that have happened. I don't want to live in that place. And I think that's where the trajectory of lamenting, this has been such an interesting learning experience for me, as I said, that the trajectory of lament is still filled with faith, that there can be the whatever happens that causes you to lament, and the whole realm of it still with faith, and yet then you come out the other end with a more joyful demeanor. And as I look back on my life, and all of those different pieces that I've walked through have made me so much less self-centered, so much more attuned to other people and their emotions and their thoughts. And I remember the day, it was in April, after I'd gone through, I had breast cancer at 40 and went through all the mastectomy and the chemos and all of the stuff. And it was in April, and I remember waking up one day, kind of like the groundhog that comes up and looks around, and it was sort of like, oh my gosh, there's life happening up here. Because again, I think I was in that dark night of the soul. I was trying to heal. I was very focused. And life became very simple to me. It was just to love people. Just to love people. I wanted each person I came in contact with to feel just a little bit better. Kind of like leave no trace with the Boy Scouts. Each person I came in contact with, I wanted them for just a moment, just for a second, to know that they've been seen, they've been heard, I love them. Back in the old days when I could hug, everyone who knows me knows I'm a huge hugger, and it is painful for me to not be able to hug people. But that became kind of my quest, that very simply is who I want to be and how I want to live. Now I can go on and do all the other things that I want to do, but in the end, it just kind of keeps coming back to, that's really all I want, is to just love people. And like I said, all of this upheaval and all this sickness and all of this loss, I've realized that I am entitled to feel my feelings. I am entitled to reach out to God, because there's a complete trust now in knowing that I am blessed, loved, chosen, complete, redeemed, a saint, wise, righteous, sanctified, holy. I'm a fellow heir with Christ, seated with him in the heavenly places. These are not adjectives I made up. These are all in the Bible. This is all the stuff that God is saying about us. And I happen to be listening on CD right now to Beth Moore's Believing God. And she really reinforced to me that I also know that God is exactly who he says he is. Near, loving, everlasting, faithful, merciful, gracious, unchanging, forgiving, steadfast, the same yesterday, today, and tomorrow. Again, I didn't make these up. This is from his words. This is Jesus's description of him. So, and the other thing I really want you to know is that amidst these moments of despair and pain and anger and loss, just like with all of you, I have been blessed in so very many different ways. I have a wonderful husband who we just had our 40th anniversary. I have 2 amazing grown children. I have a daughter-in-law who, dear Lord, FaceTimes me from Seattle every week since COVID started. Now, I'm going to be a bad Christian girl and say that thought would never have crossed my mind as a daughter-in-law to my mother-in-law. So zip it. I'm not going to say any more, but I feel incredibly blessed. I've had the chance to sing in so many different places, to be in so many musicals and perform shows that I've only ever dreamed about. I have friends literally from one end of the country to the other, and that's one of the upsides of moving everywhere. And I have this amazing life here at CORE, and I've gotten to do some incredible things that I never would have expected that I would be teaching classes at CORE. So I know that there's probably more lament, sadly, ahead of me, but the true knowing that I am to not fear, for the great I am is with me, will hopefully never be far from my heart and lips. And I hope that very same thing for you, that even when we're in the pit of darkness, it doesn't matter if you can't see that little speck of light. Just knowing it's there gives us that little hope that there will be an after standing in that liminal space. That's all I got. That's it. Do you have any? How do I do that, Ginger?
You just ask and Michelle will.
Okay. Okay, just Ginger just said, any questions? Should I take questions? I don't know how to do that, but I guess my dear friend Michelle will facilitate. If anybody has anything they want to add, please feel free to jump in with something really smart that I didn't say, or create some wonderful thing out of my story, or to hear a piece of your story. That I love more than anything, actually, much more than talking about myself. Anybody?
Maribeth, I love your phrase, the trajectory of lament. That's so good. You know, Ginger gave us kind of a description of what that looks like, but I have never really thought of that or known that
Me
to
either.
be true. Yeah. So both of you have really brought such a great teaching today. If anybody wants to speak up, I'll try to find you to, and remember you need to unmute yourself. So.
Please do, because I do love to hear goodness. I mean, I have really white hair, so I know that I'm old, but as we go on in our lives, these things happen, and to hear the other, to hear the trajectory in the other end is always so enlightening for everybody.
All right, Nicole is going to jump in. Hi, Nicole.
Hey there. A quick question. I enjoyed your share, and you are new to me, and I didn't recognize you from that movie.
Or is she new to you?
I kind of find myself mirroring your personality a little bit. I really love to be the life of the party and the joy and bring the love to others. My question for you is, how do you personally handle when you might have kind of a personal or, kind of a self, maybe a depression, maybe a kind of a low moment. I don't want to say anything specific.
I understand.
Are you able to reach out and tap those people you need? Are you more of a person who reflects on, in the word? And how do you deal with kind of your low times?
That is such a good question, because really it's kind of gone up and down over my lifetime, because like I said, I've always felt this pressure to be really strong, because people use that word to describe me. Oh, you're so strong. It's like, stop saying that. I tend to be someone who goes, my girlfriends in Seattle used to call it goes underground, because when I'm hurting or when something is really hard for me, I tend to sort of go in, which is not a terribly healthy way to manage. But, obviously I discussed some with my husband, and all the years I lived in Seattle, I had a spiritual director. I do not have that here, aside from my dear friendship with Ginger. But I can tell you that I have had friends who have been more aggressive when they feel me going underground to come in at me. So I very rarely will call someone up and reach out Now that's the healthy thing to do. But I'm going to tell you that I have not usually done that I often will manage my issues myself. I go in until I'm ready to come back out, and then all will be well again, and I'll tell the story after it's over. So I don't necessarily recommend that, but I hope that answers your question. I recommend doing what everyone says we should do, reach out, because it isolates. That sort of going inside isolates us from other people. And that's not what is wanted for us to perform at our very best. But that is, unfortunately, that's where I go. And I feel so strongly I never want to be a burden to somebody else. Ever, 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 ever. Because I'm a lot just on a daily basis. Michelle and Ginger would tell you that's true. So when I'm not a lot, I just don't want to be a burden to some other people. So again, not the best response, not the healthiest response. I highly suggest reaching out to spouses, family, friends. And I'm trying to be better at that because I know how much it means to me when people reach out to me for help. Oh my gosh, it makes me feel so good. And I keep thinking, why then can't I do that and offer that gift to somebody else? So I'm working on it. So thank you for exposing my huge fault.
Mary, I'm so happy. I think of anything that has happened today, that sentiment right there that you just echoed resonates with me because I tend to be the same way. I used to be more of a feel a little guilty and be more of an open book and reach out more. And then the last few years I've tried to be strong and kind of hold it in. But you know, I'm completely blind from birth. And sometimes when people say to me, there really is a thing that goes by that people don't say to me, oh, you're so brave. And I know their intentions are good, but
yes.
when they do that, you feel like you have the world on your shoulders. You have to be the ambassador for every person who's blind, or in your case, every person going through cancer, or, you know, the whole thing. And it's like if someone would have, it would have been different.
Boy, I love what you said about feeling like you have to be the ambassador. Oh my gosh, I couldn't have chosen a better word. That is so good because I always felt that way. The ambassador for the women who have lost their children, the ambassador for the ladies going through breast cancer, the ambassador for this, the ambassador for that, the shining light for everyone else. Well, you know, sometimes that's exhausting, right?
It's very exhausting. It's very exhausting. And it's made me refocus. I have a good friend right now who's one of my dulcimer instructors on Zoom, and she's gone through chemotherapy, and she's great. I mean, she's just got this great attitude, and she's done very well. And you know, she's lost her hair, the whole business. But I thought I'm going to be very careful about what I say to Nancy in terms of, oh, you're so brave. And instead I say, you know, when I go through, if I ever go through something like this, I want to be the inspiration that you are to others.
That is so beautiful. I love that, what you're saying. Because, you know, one of the things that I learned in all of the different experiences that started with losing my son and going on into cancer is that sweet people, oh gosh, so many times it makes people so uncomfortable and they don't know what to say, and they say things, So it has been a great learning experience for me as well to be very careful with the words I choose to say to somebody going through anything. And I promise I will not make you the ambassador for all blind people.
Thank you. And you know, the other thing, when Ginger was saying that about COVID, about, you know, people say, where did you get it?
Yes.
You know, where did you get COVID? Well, the thing is that a lot of times, and to get it, I do say that. Where did you get it? But I think if I get it, that, you know, you're only human. You can only help so much, you know.
Yes.
And you know, if you get it, it's like, well, they got it, so you're, you know, it happens to everybody. That's kind of more along the lines that I think, because what my blindness has shown me, and what a lot of adversities in everyone's life shows them, is that It can happen to anybody. And
Absolutely.
instead of thinking, oh, I want to ask them where they got it so I can avoid it, I think, well, you know, if I get it, I know that, you know, this happens to even the best people and that it happens to everybody.
Yes.
You know?
Yes. One of my greatest pains is looking at my 30 and 33-year-old children and knowing they may have already without me knowing, but knowing they are going to go through some really difficult things, and knowing that they both work harder and are pretty successful, and they're probably thinking this is all good. And when that first smack in the face is going to happen, oh gosh, I just, it's like I hate to see it. It's not like I want to say to anybody, hey, you'll get yours. We all do. It's more of, oh Lord, I just don't want. But it happens to all of us, exactly as Ginger said. Ginger, you ready? You guys, thank you so much for letting me blah, blah, blah. And seriously, if you'd like for Ginger to send you this, just so you'll always remember me, just, you know, just text her and let her know.
Thank you. Thank you.
The best. Oh my goodness. Thank you so much, Maribeth. Oh, that was a precious, precious sharing of your heart and soul and experience with us. Yeah, one of the things I love that you say is I moved from my ego into my heart, into the very center of my being. Oh my gosh. That is just, you know, and I was thinking that's such a metaphor for the Psalms too, because the lamentations at the beginning, the laments are the ego. Like, why is this happening to me? What's wrong with me? Why is God punishing me? That's all kind of coming from our ego. And then we start to move into our heart in gratitude and hope and praise. And then the very center of our being is that union with God, where we say, no matter the outcome, I'm in it with you. And oh, that's just so beautiful, Maribeth. You have such a way with words. And I was reminded of how much fun it was to be in a room with you today. So thank you for being here. So we're going to go into breakout groups now. And you know, I always invite you to discuss whatever's on your heart in the breakout rooms, but I also want to give you some prompts so you have some things to talk about. So you can talk about, what did you notice in the Psalms in book 1? So those first 41 Psalms, what did you notice? Like we started the call today. What were your favorite parts? What are the disturbing parts? How do you feel personally about lament? And when have you been in a place of lament? I think it helps to hear from each other when we have felt the things that we're feeling. So share that in breakout rooms. Michelle's going to take you there now, and I'll meet you on the other side in about 20 minutes. We'll come back and wrap up. Enjoy. Maribeth and I were just talking. Maribeth was worried about her signal at home to Zoom from home, so I got the pleasure of being in person with her today. And we were, one of the things I wanted to say at the introduction was what a support she was to me, oh gosh, 4 years ago, I think, when I was in seminary and I was first a pastor for the Vibe service, which has been renamed to Foundry now. But we used to be in the student center, and I subbed for Wendy Crosstech when she had her baby. And I was so nervous, like so sweaty. It was really my first time kind of getting back into the world after being a stay-at-home mom. And so I have curly hair. My hair would get curly along and my teeth would be so dry that my lips would stick. And I felt like a hot mess up on stage. And I think one of my first or second Sundays, Maribeth, a total stranger to me, came up and said, "Oh, you are so precious, and you are doing such a good job." And so, you know, you remember those people the rest of your life, the people that pour into you and believe into you. And I just want to thank you publicly, Maribeth, for doing that for me, and also to remind all of us to be that for somebody else, because I will always feel such gratitude in my heart. And, you know, and that really was because of people like you encouraging me and believing in me, that kind of started my work. So I appreciate you deeply. one of the things that I want to do as we wrap up today is give you a teaser for next week. So you are going to read book 2 now of the Psalms. And this one, I believe, is shorter. So you don't have to hustle quite as much as you did this week to get them all done. But the feelings are kind of the same. So continue to read them in order. Notice what you notice. I hope you're writing in your Bibles. I hope you're noting things that are speaking to you. This is poetry, which is meant to read over a few times and chew on it. And it has vivid imagery, and it, has concise phrases that say a lot in a few words. So really sit with it and let it speak to you. And I hope you're creating a spiritual practice from this that you might continue after our class is over. Next week, we're going to talk about tuning into our feelings. So the psalmists clearly have tuned in. And I wanted to start with lament because there's so much of it that I wanted you to understand where lament is coming from. But I want us to take us kind of a step back next week and say, what am I feeling? And like not having permission to lament, a lot of us weren't given permission to feel things, right? As children, as women, we were told to not cry at work and act like a man and be tough. And you might have been told to, stop crying, get a grip, you shake it off, you're fine. And all of that kind of conditioned us to not really tune into, no, I'm not fine. And I loved the conversation that Nicole and Kim and Maribeth were having about admitting that you need help and that you're struggling. I struggle with that too. And I want to talk more about that next week because that is part of our block in our relationship with God sometimes. So tuning into what you're feeling, tuning into what you're really afraid of. So a lot of times anger and lament, it might have a fear underneath it. And we're going to tune into, what am I really afraid of? Am I really afraid that I'm disappointing God? Am I really afraid that I don't count on God? Am I really afraid I'm not sure what I believe? Am I afraid of being rejected? Am I afraid of being betrayed or left behind? We're going to talk more about that because that's a big piece of our faith journey, is tuning into how we feel about God and our experiences. And then we're going to look at how the psalmists express themselves and how we could learn from them. And this issue of authorship. We're going to talk about who are these voices that we're reading? Who said this stuff? So we'll talk about the David's issues and some of the other people that wrote the Psalms that don't get the kind of nomenclature that David does. You will hear from Sherry Danner next week. Sherry is a therapist and life coach who just does amazing work. She just launched a book that is a combination of memoir with a lot of great self-help components to it. So she launched it in August. It's called Nurturing the Light Inside. If you're interested in reading it this week, it's available on Kindle and hard copy. But Sherry's going to speak to her journey and her faith story next week. And she is somebody who really values people's feelings and is an incredible listener and kind of gets it. So I'm excited for you. Gets me. I call Sherry often with Sherry, you know me better than I know myself. Help me. So I hope that you tune in next week for her. That will be an amazing teaching as well. And a lot of you had beautiful comments for Deanne last week, and I know some of you reached out to her afterwards. Please do. I'll provide Maribeth's contact information also so that you can continue in conversation with these women. They want to share their stories with you and give you hope, and they're powerful stories. So do connect if you feel a connection with them. I'm also going to do a little plug here for a community I started a couple months ago called Compassion Fix Community. And we are a group of women who have these conversations often. We just spent a month on the Enneagram. Stacey Webb led us in that as a tool for self-awareness, and that's led to some beautiful conversations. But as Kim and Nicole and Maribeth were talking, I thought, in this space where we can't be together, I'm trying to create online places. So this class certainly gives us that. And if you're interested in more of this, I do lead that group, Compassion Fix Community, and you can find out about it at compassionfix.com. If you would like to join, we would love to have you as part of that, because we're all longing for deep conversation, and I'm looking for ways to provide that. And I know that there will be additional Bible studies coming up after this one through Advent, and November and Advent, and Michelle will give you information on all of those, but please stay connected. These conversations are so rich and meaningful for all of us. So with that, we will wrap up. Michelle, is there anything I missed?
There just were some lovely, wonderful comments. Constance shared from Maribeth's sharing. In a tornado or an earthquake, sometimes the doorway is the safest place.
Oh,
wow.
Oh, wait, will you say that again?
Yeah, in a tornado or an earthquake, sometimes the doorway is the safest place.
I love that.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh, there you go.
And here's another comment with regard to the doorway from Linda. Sometimes you rock a bit in the doorway, but staying and waiting is also what the Psalms tell us to do. Wait for God.
Perfect.
To share those.
Oh yeah, that patient waiting. Oh my goodness. So that's so hard, right? And in week 4, we're going to talk about surrender, and that is part of that. How do we do that? How do we surrender the control and wait patiently? So that's awesome. I see, yes, Liz is referring to my weekly emails. I am happy to send that to all of you. The weekly, in fact, I did last week because it was on journaling and I thought about Deanne's talk. So you should have received it last week. You can unsubscribe at any time if it doesn't feed your soul. But every Tuesday morning, I do send out some kind of a practice, mindfulness or tuning into your feelings or building compassion for other people. So those, you should have received it last week, and you can sign up on my website if you did not. Yeah, Micah 7:7 speaks waiting. Oh my goodness, yes. Did you, we have like 2 more minutes. Anything coming out of the discussion that somebody feels called to share or nudged to share, something that came out in your breakout group?
I have a question.
Yes.
So it seemed like a few people that I talked to were a little anxious, worried about writing a lament for the week. So do you have any recommendations on how to do it, without fearing to get to a place that is too uncomfortable, too painful? Or yes. I don't know.
That's a beautiful question. Thank you so much for speaking up and asking that. Yeah, it's hard to do something we've never felt permission to do before. And so sit with that discomfort a little bit and look into, why is this scary? What do I feel is scary here? A couple things come up when we look at that discomfort. It might be your theology, your kind of imagery of God. Who is the God you're going to in this conversation? Is it somebody that you feel is keeping a scorecard and is wrathful and is judging your feelings? Because a lot of us were presented with a God like that growing up, and maybe even in churches now. You may have family members that are hearing that every Sunday. That theology, that picture of God, that imagery of God will keep you from being truthful with God, because anybody that's judging us and scoring us and rating us, in a sense, is scary to present ourselves to. So I would look at that a little bit, of what is the imagery of God. And that, I talk about that a lot in my classes, because I think that's a big block to a deep connection to God. You have permission to change your imagery of God too, because for 3,000 years or longer, we've been trying to figure out what God is. who God is. Like, what's even the right word to describe? Is God a force of energy? Is God a human form? Is God Jesus now with God, but then Jesus was talking to God, so how did that work? It's fair to ask all of these questions and work through your imagery of God. So that could be keeping you from lamenting a little bit. I think the other thing that keeps us from lamenting is we don't know where to even start. Like, I don't know what I'm feeling. I don't even know words for it. I remember Maribeth in our podcast said when she lost her son, she went into a state of nothingness. She felt nothing. And so you don't even know what to speak to. You don't even know what to lament on because there aren't words. And that's why reading the Psalms is a prayerful practice for us, because they give us the words we can't come up with sometimes. So if it's too hard to write your own, read the others. Writing your own is only if you want to do that. If you feel like it's cathartic. I will admit it took me a while to be able to do this. I had a scorekeeping God in mind going into seminary. And part of the reason I went to seminary was I really wanted to figure this out. And I felt like I needed to study it deeply to try to find the answers to my questions. And I didn't get answers, but what I found was a very compassionate, loving God that I hadn't heard a lot about. And so I had to really work on that. We talked about that with the mystics in the last class, Transcend, which is still available out on my website and on Church of the Resurrection, core.org on Church of the Resurrection's website. So you can go back and watch those. That's what the mystics were really struggling with, is I see organized religion presenting a God that I'm not sure I feel comfortable praying to. And the mystics were trying to find a loving God and working through that. And they kept journals that help us today. But I had to work to let go of the judging, wrathful God. And you might have to too. But yeah, I hope you'll embrace writing a lament. I hope you feel permission, but if it's not comfortable, don't force it. Don't force it at all. Just read the Psalms, let other people lament, and that will gradually help you get more comfortable. Any other questions?
I just want to say how much I look forward to this. I mean, the calendar, I know tomorrow's Thursday, because, you know, days tend to run together right now. But every time that I see that it's Thursday coming, I'm like, yay, Bible study with Ginger and Michelle. It's, you know, one of the highlights of the week.
Thank you, Kim. That means so much to me, because it is for me too. I see Lauren's comment of struggling with being raised in a Catholic church, more of a fearful God. Absolutely. Absolutely. A judgment. I will say that one thing that Catholics do well is encouraging confession, and the Psalms have a lot of that too. Watch for confession in the Psalms. That's an element that you'll start to see more of. And as you confess, imagine a very loving God embracing you with that, not a repenting, lecturing God. So maybe in your confessional, work with imagery there too. Who am I going to with this confession? And I know it's a priest in literal format, but think figuratively. God is hearing this, and how is God responding? And I will admit, we all have a lot of work to do on finding a loving God. And you've probably heard me with theories on why that was part of church history, right? That they wanted you to live a little fearful. They wanted our ancestors to live a little fearful, so they were dependent on the church. There were economic motives there. There were clergy ego motives there. And so this was shaped, that's really the Protestant Reformation was part of changing that, but it's been 500 years since the Protestant Reformation of calling out some of this fearful God stuff. So we're slow to embrace new theology, and it feels scary. Like, am I doing something wrong? Because this is a belief I've held and my family's held for years. So just be gentle with yourself. It's okay to start to go back to the teachings of Jesus. Get a Bible that has the red letters of Jesus in it and just read the red letters. You know, a lot of children's Bibles have red letters in them. Go back and look at what Jesus taught. Jesus is the way I found a loving God. Yeah, Christine writes about the thought rhyming journaling. So Emmanuel journaling prompts from last week help find a loving God. They absolutely do. That's what Deanne has certainly encountered in her 10 years of journaling. She has really come to find a very loving God. That's supportive. Those supportive prompts do help. Thank you, Christine, for pointing that out. So this week you read book 2, which starts at Psalm 42. And off the top of my head, I can't remember how far it goes. But you will have a handout on week 2 that will have your check boxes for you. And you will read book 2 this week of the Psalms. All right, we will wrap it up with that, and I'll close us in prayer. Oh, dear, gracious, loving God, help us continue to see the truth of who you are. Help us look to Jesus's teachings on compassion and mercy and forgiveness and grace. Help us linger on the words in Jesus's teachings and sermons and prayers. Help us go back to seeing that you are a loving, compassionate being in this with us, wanting us to thrive and prosper and live into our potential. Sometimes we lose sight of that. Fill us with grace that would lead us back to your love. Be with Maribeth as she goes into her day after having shared her story. Let her know how much we love her and care for her, and what a beautiful job she did in serving all of us today. Bless her, hold her dear to you. And thank you for her vulnerability. I know you were with her in that journey today. Be with all of us as we go into the week ahead, as we sit with your psalmists and find you in their words. Bless all of these beautiful women. In your name, amen.
Amen.
All right,
Thank
I will
you,
see
Ginger.
Thank you, Ginger. Thank you.
you next Thursday. Love you all.
Thank you. Thank